In math and a few other STEM subjects as well, if you're typing up something formally, the convention is to use this software, or really computer language, called LaTeX, LaTeX. And what this does is it formats everything in exactly the way that you want it to. So if you've ever been working in some Word documents and everything isn't quite aligning right, maybe your preferences aren't set the right way, the solution, or the way around that, is to use TeX instead. And the reason this isn't widely used by all students is that it has a little bit of a learning curve. Rather than just writing text in a document, we have to include some commands, but once you get the hang of it, it really isn't that difficult. So the first couple times you use this, you're going to think, oh, this is taking way longer than it would be if I just used Word or some other text editor. But once you've used it a few times, once you don't have to look up what the commands are, it really becomes easier, and everything, especially math, can get formatted in nice, neat ways. This video is targeted towards people who haven't used TeX before. The idea is to get to the point where we can export a PDF that has at least some basic written work in it. Okay, so what I have here is what you would find if you opened up a blank document. So I'm using Overleaf.com, which does all of the software on the server, so we can just use this in a web browser. If before you have installed a program that runs LaTeX, feel free to use that instead. I do recommend that if you haven't seen any of this before, that you go with Overleaf. So you can just go in, make an account, and then if you click New Project, and for example, name it Blank Demo, you should get a page that looks just about like this. So I'm going to walk through what this left-hand side is talking about. So this is the input, and then the right-hand side, if you hit compile, is going to give us a PDF. So in this case, there isn't much to it yet, but we will add some things in as we go. Any TeX input file or source file has two main components. We have everything above the begin document line and everything below the begin document line. The stuff above it is all of the information where it's specifying the metadata, like what the title is, who the author is, what the date is, as well as any settings or preferences or packages that we want to use as well. If we want to do any kind of fancy graphics or really anything beyond basic text, we usually want to import some sort of package. If you don't know what any of this is talking about, don't worry, the template that I'll share has all of this stuff there already. So we don't really have to mess with anything above the begin document line, except for changing the name, the date, the title, and maybe if you want to do something different, you might need to add another package. Between the begin document line and end document lines are where we're actually typing in the stuff that we want to see on our exported PDF. So there are two ways to put in information. One of them is to actually just type something. So I could write out some plain text, or I could specify commands. So a command is going to start with a backslash, and then it's going to be one of the commands that it knows. So for example, LaTeX understands make title, and that is just one of the functions that it knows, and it's going to export something that looks like this. So because it knows the title, name, and date, it will set things up this way. These are all things that you can customize and change, but this is just the default setup. So now that I've added some text here, and I hit recompile, it will include some plain text in the PDF as well. Okay, so this is what shows up if you just hit create new blank document. But what I recommend that you do is, rather than starting with something from scratch, is to use one of the templates that you can either find online, or I've shared one with you as well. So the template that I've shared is thanks to Professor Deb Bergstrand, who was at SWAT until last year when she retired. Her template has most of the stuff that you need in order to be able to write probably about anything in this class, but it doesn't have too much extra stuff that you don't need. So I want to walk through the metadata or the header information, and just so you know where things are if you need to change them. So again, this whole document should be broken up in terms of what's before begin document and everything that's after. So the before begin document is all of our settings. In this template, Professor Bergstrand chose to include a few more packages. For example, AMS Math lets us format things in a very mathy way. It's used a lot, as well as a few others. If you don't know what any of these things are, don't worry about it. The only thing in the top half of this document that you should change is things like the title or the author. All of this stuff you can just leave alone. Okay, so the second half of this, the information between begin document and end document includes some more writing. So what I've written up here is a sample proof. So this is the proof of the theorem that the square root of 2 is irrational. Most of class this week is going to be dedicated to the different components that go into good proof writing. This video is just focused on, all right, how do we write stuff in a PDF? One nice thing about this template is that we've defined a few environments or functions. For example, begin theorem and end theorem. So if we have these lines, whatever is between them is going to be written in a nice formatted theorem way. So over on the right, theorem 1, the square root of 2 is irrational, etc. We can then have text. We can begin a proof. So line 41 begins the proof section. Line 56 ends it. And then everything between that is information that we're writing up in the proof section. I don't want to dive too much into the nitty-gritty details of how we can get all this formatting to work, but I do want to talk about math mode, which is one of the most common features or settings that you're going to use when working with LaTeX. And this shows up when we have our dollar signs. So let's say that we want to write the square root of 2. We don't want to write out the word square root of 2. Maybe we want it to actually look like the square root symbol of 2. So line 39 is the line right after the theorem. So on our PDF, this is the line to show that square root of 2 is irrational, etc. So the way that we write that is we tell the compiler, hey, I'm writing something that's math now. And we do that by starting with a dollar sign and then ending it with a dollar sign. So we've started a dollar sign, and then we can say, all right, let's use the math command /sqrt, open curly brackets, 2, close curly brackets, prints out square root of 2. Right? So as you can imagine, there are many more commands that we can use to format math in just about any other way. For example, fractions can be written as \frac, and then the numerator and denominator. These are all commands that have to be used in math mode, i.e. between dollar signs or in special environments. Okay, so if you've never used this before, this is a lot. Rather than just writing up an assignment, we have to learn this new language and write it up with that. Well, what I recommend if you are at all intimidated by this is to start off with one of these templates, and as you go, change just 1 or 2 things at a time, hitting recompile in between, and just double check and make sure that you haven't broken anything yet. If, for example, I was editing, and rather than the square root of 2, I wanted to talk about the square root of 3, and if I forgot to close math mode, if I forgot to include another dollar sign, and I hit recompile, it's going to alert me that, hey, something's not right. So you might notice that in our PDF, everything looks kind of weird. But thankfully, Overleaf and probably any other LaTeX software is going to tell you, hey, something is going wrong. So this red X at line 39, if you hover over it, it says, hey, maybe you're missing a dollar sign. And hopefully then you can go through and figure out what the problem is. And we can go from there. Okay, so I recommend using a template to get started, maybe then just going through and deleting what the theorem and the proof are, but then adding pieces back in slowly. If you want to do something that you don't know how to format yet. For example, if you wanted to make some sort of table like this align section, which results in supposing, etc. So if I want to do something new, if I want to format something that I haven't done before, I will typically just run a Google search for LaTeX how to format blank, and then copy and paste a chunk of code, so something that looks like this, and then go in and change the individual pieces that I want to change. Rather than supposing I wanted to write something else there, and maybe add in extra lines, reformat it from there. So I really encourage you to, rather than trying to write some of this from scratch, to pull in from other sources. I do want to make the distinction between pulling actual text answers to these questions off the internet and pulling things that'll help you format LaTeX. I'm not grading you on your formatting or even your ability to write formatting LaTeX. That's not what this class is about. So copying and pasting formatting pieces from the internet is encouraged. Just make sure that all of the text is written by yourself. All right. And lastly, I want to emphasize that this is challenging. If this is your first computer language especially, and this is a computer language, then it's not easy to get used to how this works. Typing up a bunch of stuff and then hitting compile and getting an error is certainly frustrating, especially if you're looking at it and you just don't see what's wrong. So for anytime when you're working on something like this, even if you've done this for a while and something just isn't clicking and you're about to put your head through a wall, take a breath, take a step back. Everybody feels this way at some point, especially if you're new at this. Reach out, ask for help, talk to your group mates, talk to the Slack. I am more than happy to help people with their LaTeX formatting. There will be a dedicated Slack channel for, hey, I can't get this code piece to work right. This class is not meant to be a programming class. This is not meant to be a big component of it. However, we are going to need at least some basic skills with this in order to write up nice, neat, formatted proofs. And I promise, after you've done this a few times, it really, really does get easier. It becomes just as easy as typing something up, only you don't have to worry about the formatting because it just works.